Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio. Hello and happy Friday. I'm Holly Fry.
And I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
We had another installment of Eponymous Foods this week.
Yeah.
This one came about entirely because I had the shocking discovery that pralines were an eponymous food.
Yeah.
And it happened because one of my friends and I were discussing pralines in text messages recently, and I thought, I haven't tried my hand at those in a long time. I should refresh on the best possible techniques for making them. And I did, and one of the recipes I came across mentioned that it was named for Plessis Pralin, and I was like, je m'excuse. And then I was suddenly like deep in it, and I was like, well, I guess we're loaded up for another eponymous foods episode. Delicious. Most of my notes to discuss for behind the scenes are about crepe Suzette.
Okay,
first of all, if you can get your hands on that Henri Charpentier biography, do it. It's a very charming read. It was republished recently-ish, so it's not hard to get a hold of. He calls this biography the recipe of himself. Like, this is the recipe of me. All of the things that went into making me the person I am. And it is very charming. The way he structures stories, we mentioned in this episode that he just kind of blurts out his recipe for crepe as he is telling the story of inventing them. And that's how all of it goes. There aren't like, here's the recipes. He'll be like, and then I made this thing for this important visiting noble. Oh, here's how we threw that together. And it's like all of the measures are there, all of the methods. It's just written out in prose style instead of the way you normally see a recipe, which is pretty interesting. He also talks a lot about, kind of the blunders that he made and the sense of right and wrong that he brought with himself from growing up in a poor family in the country to these incredibly luxurious spaces where they were serving very famous and important people.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned that he got fired from some jobs. He quit some jobs. Basically, like, he thought if people weren't treating their staff correctly, it was not worth staying, which is a really interesting idea in this point in time when we hear so many stories of people just being kind of beaten down by their employers in service jobs and not having any recourse. And he kind of seemed to not care, although it did almost kill him. There is a great quote, though, that I loved, because one of these jobs that he had when he was in London to learn English and he was working for this woman, there was essentially like the housekeeper who was a pretty young woman herself. And he was really distraught and kind of horrified by the way that the staff was fed, because at night their only meal was like cheese and crackers for dinner, while like they were literally serving people these, multi-course, really beautiful, expensive meals.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had kind of finagled the owner of the house, his boss, to let him take over doing all of the grocery shopping, because he had learned how to do it from his stepbrother, who was a really well-known chef and would go to farmers markets and like haggle and teach him how to buy the best fresh produce. Also, that book, if you want to learn how to pick produce, he's got you on everything. Like, he really, especially for local produce, he's great. But he ended up, like, there was a time where both he and the housekeeper were hungry and it was not their designated mealtime. And he was like, I don't care. I'm going to cook us something really quick. And he mentions that he basically just made them like scrambled eggs. But there's a quote in it that I thought was the best thing ever, which is, when you are hungry, a pair of eggs is never a mistake. And I was like, that is solid advice. Because when I'm very hungry and I can't think of anything, I can scramble a couple eggs really quick and I'm great.
Yeah, when I'm having to cook for myself, something involving eggs is like a big staple.
Quick and easy. He left that job because he had been saving so much money on the grocery bill that he was basically using the excess to buy the staff better groceries so they could eat better food. And he got caught roasting chickens for the staff and got in trouble. And he was like, if you don't want us to eat right, I don't want to work here. And that's when he left. And this brings me to the poodle story.
Okay.
So he really speaks very, very, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not just lovingly. It's not even adoringly. It's somewhat reverently of this poodle. Because he was, after he left that job, and he had initially paid up his rent in advance on a room, but that ran out and he got evicted. And so he started sleeping under benches in London. And this in and of itself was a big education for him. Like, that was something he had never experienced before. And he was really sort of shocked once again by like what the culture of life on the street was for kids. But he mentions one night hiding under a bench, and there was a policeman coming along and like hitting the benches with his stick. And he found this one that was out of the way and he hid there. And a dog came and laid down next to him. And he realized it was a poodle that like was in rough shape.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he was sure the poodle had originally, in fact, been in France because it responded when he spoke French to it. That's a whole other story, but I love it. I love it. But that poodle stayed with him every single night. And like the poodle would go out and hunt on its own and occasionally bring him things back. But he was pretty convinced that the poodle knew that if he found something and the two of them were together, like they would have to fight, because it was literally like every man for himself in terms of what to eat. But that the night that he thought he was going to die was the one night that when the policeman came through, instead of hunkering down with him, the poodle got out from under the bench and started barking for the policeman to come over. And so he believes in his heart that poodle saved his life.
Oh,
and
wow.
according to his story, again, unverifiable, but pretty great, when he did recover in the hospital, when he was well enough to actually like speak and be functional, the policeman came to visit him and had in fact adopted the poodle and then brought him to visit before he left for France again, which is a very sweet story. I don't care if it's true. It's a great story. It hurts nobody for me to believe that's true. I love it. It also feeds into the poodle fever I've been living in lately, but that's a different thing also. Not ready for a poodle. Not ready for a dog at all. I have one more thing to talk about.
Okay.
The crepe Suzettes of my youth were a lie.
Oh, no. Okay, how?
From someone that grew up in a household with French speakers from France and should have known better. So I don't know if this was a choice. But I got crepe Suzette as a kid that was not citrusy at all. It was like mapley, and it was not set on fire. And so when I had real crepe Suzette as an adult, I was like, what? And also, hooray. No shade to maple syrup, but that's not crepe Suzette.
No.
Real crepe Suzette is something else. It's delicious.
Yeah.
Delicious. I want to cook all these things now. I have not done Charpentier's crepe recipe yet, but I will.
Right.
I will. And I haven't retested my praline thing, but I will. Got to use a thermometer or it's not going to solidify right.
Right.
I've had some failures in the past. That's why I'm a little trepidatious.
I'm not sure if I've had crepe Suzette. I kind of feel like I might have had some when we were in New Orleans that time.
Maybe.
But I also sort of feel like the only thing I've ever had that was served flaming tableside was baked Alaska, but it was like cruise ship baked Alaska, which is prepared in enormous quantities, and I don't know if I don't know how it compares to something served not on a cruise ship.
I don't either, but I like a little flambe now and again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most of the time, if you are in a restaurant setting and they're doing flambe, everything is so carefully controlled that, like, even if you are maybe one of those people that is afraid of fire, because I know that's a thing, it's controlled enough that it's going to burn out before it could cause any trouble.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, the amounts of things in it that are flammable are very carefully measured so that even if no one blew it out, it's gonna go out. Watch, I say that and someone will be like, I went to a restaurant and they were not careful and I caught my hair on fire.
Here's my video of a disaster.
Yeah, I hope not for anybody's safety, but yeah, every time we do an eponymous foods, I'm then like, well, I just want to eat everything on earth now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ah, crepe Suzette and flambe. And the sandwich thing just cracks me up.
Yeah. We've gotten so many emails and comments and whatever.
Yeah.
You missed the most obvious one. It's the sandwich. And it's like, well, that's sort of a different thing.
Yes and no. And there's a lot of setup.
Yeah.
So it was time this time.
There's really just so many food. We've talked about it you said in this episode, in other food history episodes, so many foods that really were meant to be like portable for people to take something out into the fields to be able to eat without having to go back to the house. And something ensconced in bread is
not new in the least bit.
Right.
Yeah.
We are aware of how many conversations on the internet there are about whether something is or is not a sandwich. I don't need to participate in these conversations or hear about them.
I don't think you were in the office the day I lost my mind over this issue.
No, I don't think so.
You have inadvertently awakened the beast. So
yeah.
I hate, and I'm sorry, and I know hate is a strong word, but I hate when people argue about food in terms of like preference.
Sure.
Just eat what you want.
Yeah.
There are so few joys in life. Take the ones that you have and run with them and don't poo-poo anybody else's. But there was a time in our office when there was a project being discussed via group email and everyone started having arguments about things like what is or is not a sandwich, what is or is not the superior, blah, 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 blah. And when you're on group emails anyway, those aren't my favorite either. They just tend to you're getting an email every 30 seconds. And if you're trying to do something, for me, even stopping to be remove me from this is a pain in the neck.
Right.
So then you're getting the constant influx of bling, 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 bling while you're trying to write or research something or whatever. And I literally stood up and said, with expletives included that I won't put here, I do not care what anyone likes or eats. And everyone was like, uh-oh, Holly's real mad about something completely irrational. But I had just had it. I was like, don't.
I think there's a lot less of it now, but our whole office used to have a very reply all culture. I mean, specifically in everyone replying all to the email in an ongoing way, not anything else that has the proper name reply all.
Yeah.
And it could get.
And some of that was great because sometimes it was workshopping stuff. It just was this is a topic that I just hate. Don't insult other people's tastes. It's not cool. I don't care. I don't love ketchup, but I don't care if people put it on their eggs. If that makes them love it, great. That's marvelous.
I feel similarly about when someone is living somewhere and they're having weather that is atypical for where they live. And people start chiming in with how much more extreme the weather is where they live.
Right.
And I'm like, you don't need to be passing judgment on the people from Atlanta when there's 3 inches of snow that brings the whole city to a halt if you live in Maine.
Yeah. Any of those.
Let's all be kinder and more chill to each other. That's sort of what I think.
Right. The part where I really get a little bit, and it applies to both of these scenarios, is, and actually something I was talking to my husband about just this morning about doctor visits, is if you give me information in a way that is condescending, I don't care how much data you have to back it up. I don't want to listen to you.
Sure.
Just don't.
Yeah.
There's no reason. It's insulting to me. Why would I want to trust your judgment if you cannot judge how to be kind to people when sharing information. Anyway, that's all. We talked about Domesday Book this week.
We did.
I didn't write usually as I'm putting together any outline, I write a bunch of side notes of like the things I want to talk about on behind the scenes.
Sure.
And I don't have a ton of those this time because part of me just the whole time I was working on this was like, did William the First understand how to not have bureaucracy in a way we've never figured out again? That's all I kept thinking about. I mean, we both work for and have worked for a number of large companies. So I'm not singling out any one of them because they all seem to have that issue of like, I have a great project idea and someone's like, that's great. But like the execution of it becomes this long, arduous thing that takes sometimes years and years when it's like, but if you just let my team do it, we could do it in like a month and a half. That has happened at, almost every company I've ever been at. That certainly applies to things. I mean, it is a notorious joke that like government doings take an extra long time.
Yeah.
So the idea that this all happened without, as Professor Baxter mentioned, without any digitization, without just really rudimentary tools in terms of what we would think of today, running something like this, and it happened so quickly. I'm just like, what is the lesson we can take away?
Yeah. Well, and what I remember from that 2021 research that we talked about was that like the first draft of it was super fast. But like the compiling and revising part did take longer and have more chaos is maybe not the right word, but like the fact-checking compiling part.
Right. That took longer.
Yeah, that took a longer process, but like still, given everything, pretty astounding.
Yeah. I really want to know about that one scribe.
Mm-hmm.
This is the movie I want.
Okay.
Or maybe even a novel. I don't care. Just this one scribe who all they do all day long is use their abbreviated Latin and their beautiful handwriting to collate all of this data.
All the things. Yeah.
into one long honkin' list of a book. And then the person that comes after them and does the fact checking and writes little notations. The whole thing fascinates me.
Yeah.
It seems like dark arts must have been involved.
Speaking of novels, are you familiar with Connie Willis?
Only by name. I haven't read any of her work.
Connie Willis has a book called The Domesday Book. But it is spelled Doomsday, DOOM.
Right. Phonetically.
Yeah, the way one would expect it to be spelled. And it's part of a collection of books that are about these historians from Oxford University who do their work via time travel. And it's been long enough ago since I read the Domesday Book that like I don't want to try to summarize it. I'll probably mess something up, but if I'm remembering correctly, that's the one where somebody goes back in time, they mess something up. It's not exactly that they mess something up. It's that there's factors involved. This person winds up unexpectedly during the Black Death, which was not the plan. Simultaneously, back in the present, there is a massive influenza outbreak happening. That means the people on the ground that are supposed to be like supporting this person who's back in the past and bringing them home again, like they're all out of commission. With this massive flu pandemic. All of this seems like it might read really differently now in the year 2024 than when I originally read it, which was well over a decade ago. Having not, lived in a time of airborne disease pandemic. But yeah, I find all of those books really interesting.
I'm like, did they have to violate the Prime Directive? But then I'm folding in a completely different and wrong thing.
No, if I'm remembering the sort of premise of these books correctly, the universe kind of resists time travel that could dramatically affect the future.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why when they send somebody back into the past, sometimes they don't wind up where they expected because the universe has been like, "Nuh-uh, you can't go to that moment." I could be paraphrasing this badly. If the idea of historians from Oxford time traveling into the medieval period sounds interesting to you, I recommend, just getting that book from the library or whatever instead of relying on my, decade plus old recollection of it.
Yeah, we talk about how we would use the time machine in various ways.
Yeah.
Maybe now we can add to the list, figure out why they were so efficient.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, the problem may just be that people were
terrible working conditions.
Yeah, afraid to not be efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and things are a little bit
great.
different when you have a king who can unilaterally decide things.
Right.
Versus
instead of committees, discussions, bureaucracy.
Yeah.
When the bureaucratic ladder is relatively short, things do move faster. That doesn't mean it's better.
That doesn't mean it's
just
better.
Means it's faster.
No.
But it would be nice if things like, just basic home assessments, etc., went a little faster. Although I will say, as a shout out to speed, we, a couple years ago added a little bit onto our house as part of a bigger, lots of stuff that needed to get fixed because it was in pretty dire straits. And I mean, I don't think the inspector had finished signing his name to say, yes, I've inspected the house and it's done. And we had a property assessor out here the next day, just on the doorstep going, I'm ready to see the new stuff. So some parts of bureaucracy move very quickly indeed.
I had kind of the opposite experience when I had to do a massive amount of work on the house that I owned in Atlanta, which is a very long story. But that whole project took almost a year. Some of it, because insurance was paying for it, and that caused there to be various things that had to be done in a certain way. But then some of it was also permitting. Getting the permit to do the thing just took so long.
See, we had the opposite.
Yeah.
Where I don't want to get too off kilter talking about home renovation, but our contractor that we ended up working with and who we've continued to work with and we really love, they normally don't work in our county.
Oh, I see.
We abut the county you used to live in.
Uh-huh.
And when they put in the applications for permits, they had approvals in 3 days.
Oh, wow.
And they were like, we want to work in this county forever. But then we found out where the slowdown was, and it was on inspection because our inspector was very, very thorough to the point of really?
Yeah.
Where a lot of things happened that made us have to pull things out and redo them. Even though they were perfectly fine, nobody was cutting corners, but we discovered, I don't quote me on this because I don't know the actual code, but this is how it was explained to me. Mm-hmm. The little tiny addition we did to the house, the grade that the roof has to be at is 2 degrees different than the next county over, and they had always worked in that county and not this one. Yeah. And so then they were like, well, you have to redo the roof.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of little stuff like that kept coming up.
Yeah.
And that was where slowdown was. But the permitting was fast as lightning. And like I said, they were on our doorstep the day after the final inspection. So.
Yeah. I had stuff the entire house had to be gutted down to the studs.
I remember going over there at one point.
And there were no insides to it. And I don't remember which thing had been I think maybe there was plumbing that needed to be moved to bring the kitchen setup up to code. And when the inspector that came out, they were like, well, see, the issue now is I can see the wiring and the wiring is not. So now we have to fully update all the wiring.
Yeah, that is the trick. If you have a dream of buying an old house and renovating it.
Yeah.
In case anybody out there doesn't know, codes change over the years, and your beautiful house that seems like it functions perfectly fine will suddenly be discovered to not be up to current code, and that can lead to a lot of having to do things you maybe hadn't planned for.
Yes.
It's a lot.
Fortunately, I was not living in the house. No one was living in the house at that moment. And so the fact that it took forever and kept having additional things that had to be taken care of was a giant inconvenience, but like not the worst thing that ever could have happened.
Yeah. Yeah. All of ours was, like I said, on a little addition to the house that was not.
Right.
We could live in the house just fine without that having been completed and with it being slowed down, but woof.
Right.
Woof. William the Conqueror wouldn't have let it take that long. That's ridiculous. I'm not hero worshiping William the Conqueror or anything. This is yet another moment though in because I've certainly, studied the Battle of Hastings.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Throughout the years. But I really just like revisiting all of his life and like the constant battling.
Yeah.
To preserve what you have and gain more. I once again am like, who on earth would want to be part of royal succession? Not this gal. I got dresses to make. I don't have time to be defending people all the time from trying to take my stuff. It just doesn't sound fun to me.
Nope.
No, not even one little bit. It does make me think a lot about censuses and surveys and how they all work and what they can achieve. And I'm glad we could peek at Domesday Book a little bit because it is a fascinator. And I do find myself fascinated at the reverence with which people talk about it, because it is like, when we say it is a foundational volume, that is not an understatement.
Yeah.
It's like, it is a very important work for history in general, and certainly English history. So it's a cool one to think about. You know what else is cool to think about?
What?
Time off. So if this is your weekend coming up, I hope that you're not caught up in any kind of bureaucratic tangle that's slowing anything down for you and that you can just relax. If it's not your weekend up, I double hope that for you because it's not fun to get caught up in that kind of stuff. It can be very stressful. So we hope everybody has the most relaxing coming up few days they possibly can, and that everyone is good to one another. We will be right back here tomorrow with a classic episode, and then on Monday with something brand new.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.